Greetings and welcome to A Contemplative Reader, where together we will explore the mysterious, the mystical, the spiritual, the otherworldly, and the transcendent in various books and literature. This year I am participating in an event on BookTube known as Historathon, where readers are encouraged to read nonfiction works of history. We're now in the third quarter of the year, and that means we are reading books in the time frame of approximately 1500 AD or CE until about 1820. This year, my reading list will primarily involve books dealing with the English Reformation. So I will be offering a brief bookshelf tour of some of my books about the English Reformation, which will also serve as my piles of possibilities for the things that I intend to read for the third quarter of Historathon this year. Why read about the English Reformation? Well, for one, the English Reformation involves larger-than-life characters of history. Characters such as King Henry VIII, the monarch who married several wives, divorced some of them, beheaded some of them, all in pursuit of a male heir. And in the midst of that, ended up dissolving the relationship between the Church in England and the Church of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy, and named himself as the supreme head of the English Church. Also, other characters are Queen Mary, King Henry VIII's daughter, also known as Bloody Mary, Queen Elizabeth, long-lasting reign, and ended up being the monarch who would permanently secure the place of the independent Church of England, sometimes also known as the Anglican Church. St. Thomas More, whose loyalty to the Church of Rome and the connection between the English Church and the Catholic Church ended up costing his life. The man for all seasons. Another reason is the impact of the English Reformation was not only felt there in England and Britain, but around the world as the growth of the British Empire spread around the world. That version of Christianity went along with it, including to the United States, where in the colonies, the Anglican Church was the established church in various colonies, and even with the establishment of the United States of America and the freedom of religion that went along with the Constitution, the Episcopal Church, which is the sort of the American version of the Church of England, the Anglican tradition, many leaders of our nation, whether it be presidents or Supreme Court justices or other leaders, were from the Episcopal Church. So there still was a great influence of this particular faith tradition on culture and society in the United States as it was in Britain and around the world. So on to the bookshelf tour. What I'm reading right now is a book entitled The Stripping of the Altars by Eamon Duffy. This book was published in about 1992 originally, and there's a second edition, which I have in my hands here, published by Yale University Press. And what this book does is challenges the narrative that England was ripe for the Reformation because of a general feeling of disgust with the Catholic Church and alleged corruption and things that were going along with it. So there's this sort of a narrative that England was ready for the Reformation and the people readily went along with it. Well, what Duffy does is take the view of the common person in England and challenges that narrative. And just on the back here it says, the lay people's experience of religion in the pre-Reformation church shows that late medieval Catholicism was neither decadent nor decayed, but was a strong and vigorous tradition, and that the Reformation produced a violent rupture from a popular and theologically respectable religious system. In fact, there's a kind of a lovely sentence in the preface here which summarizes the thesis of his book. Duffy here states, the book was informed by a conviction that the Reformation, as actually experienced by ordinary people, was not an uncomplicated, imaginative liberation, the restoration of true Christianity after a period of degeneration and corruption, but, for good or ill, a great cultural hiatus, which had dug a ditch, deep and dividing between the English people and their past. This book obviously came after the life of J.R.R. Tolkien, but I think that Tolkien would wholeheartedly agree with that assessment. Because I imagine when he was writing The Lord of the Rings and coming up with the world of Middle-earth, he had a certain fondness as a devout Catholic in England for that medieval Catholicism that predated the Reformation in England. Another book, which is kind of a general survey of the English Reformation, is by Peter Marshall, Heretics and Believers, a history of the English Reformation. This is also published by Yale University Press. I believe this was published in about 2018, winner of the Wolfson History Prize. This has not only a history of the Reformation as the people of England might have experienced at the time, but a general historical survey of the various leaders, both political and religious, that were involved in the Reformation. It's quite a chunky book, over 500 pages, but if I have time, I'll try to get to this one during the third quarter as well. Another book about the English Reformation is by Peter Ackroyd, and it's called The Tudors. The Tudors, of course, were the family of monarchs involved in the Reformation. As the subtitle of the book says, The History of England from Henry VIII to Elizabeth I. So this is a part of a series on English history by Ackroyd. I've read the first book in the series, Foundation, about early English history, and I enjoyed that one, so I have no doubt that I would enjoy this one as well if I get to it. One that I really hope to get to this quarter is called The Last Divine Office by Geoffrey Moorhouse, and this is published by Bluebridge Books. Henry VIII and the Dissolution of the Monasteries. I'll just read the little summary in the back cover. On the last day of 1539, the Benedictine monks of the great monastery and cathedral of Durham in the north of England came together in their magnificent church for the last divine office of the year, intoning their prayers and chanting their psalms in the cold and dark of the evening. A few hours earlier, these Durham Benedictines had surrendered their religious house to King Henry VIII, thus ending an era that had lasted for 450 years. The Last Divine Office explores the enormous upheaval caused by the English Reformation and the dissolution of the monasteries. It recreates in vivid detail what life was like in a major monastery before the dissolution began in 1536, and how that life was forever transformed on the orders of the king. Henry VIII had embarked on a deliberate separation of the church in England from its parent in Rome, and the monasteries had become a particular target for his zeal for reform, as well as a replenishment of wealth for his almost empty exchequer. It's kind of a sad era of English history, at least in my view. You can kind of tell from my background here that I'm somewhat fond of monks, and as I've discussed in other videos as well. So it was kind of a sad thing that really under the Henry VIII, many, if not most, of the English monasteries were devolved, property was plundered, and ended up in the hands of the king. As I mentioned in my bookshelf tour on Anglo-Saxon Christianity, going back for 1,000 years before Henry VIII, monasteries in England really formed a cultural and religious center throughout England. So this definitely represented the change in society in England. A few decades later, we have King James, and King James, of course, is most predominantly known for the King James Bible, which was a triumph of English literature. Now, you can debate the quality of the translation, perhaps, but certainly the poetic language involved, particularly in the Psalms, is not matched by any other translation. And so back in about 2003, 2004, this book came out called God's Secretaries, The Making of the King James Bible, to observe the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible. And so this book describes how that book came about. Again, this would have been a few decades after the English Reformation, which occurred primarily in the 1530s. This would be about 60, 70 years later. But certainly kind of those early stages of the English Reformation and the establishment of the Anglican Church. A little more obscure book is called Anglicans and Orthodox, Unity and Subversion, 1559 to 1725. This deals with the fledgling Anglican church's outreach to the Orthodox churches in the East, whether Greece, Russia, Eastern Europe, and the like. One of the great what-ifs of the Reformation, I think, is what if, in the aftermath of the Reformation, the outreach from the churches of England and churches of Germany and Scandinavia, which had become Lutheran, their outreaches to the Eastern Orthodox churches would have led to some sort of unity with them. That, of course, did not happen, but again, it's a great what-if in my mind. Another book. This deals with a historical figure of the Reformation. This is a book about Cardinal Wolsey, who was the Lord Chancellor under Henry VIII. He was a cardinal, and so obviously he was high up in the Roman Catholic Church, but also high up in the political establishment of England connected to Henry VIII. So when Henry VIII, his marriage to Catherine of Aragon did not yield a male heir, he ended up seeking an annulment from Rome so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. When the annulment did not happen, Wolsey took the fall for that, was arrested, and ended up dying. But this is a biography of Wolsey published by Time Life Books. Remember Time Life Books? I believe this was published in 1958 and is called Naked to Mine Enemies. Again, about Cardinal Wolsey. A historical survey of theological aspect of the Reformation is this book by Peter Brooks called Thomas Cranmer's Doctrine of the Eucharist, an essay in historical development. This book was published, I believe, by Seabury Press, which is a publishing imprint, I believe, of the Episcopal Church in 1965. Again, the Anglican Church is sometimes known as the via media, kind of between Catholic theology and the theology of the Continental Reformation, Calvin, Luther, Zwingli, etc. And the Anglican doctrine of the Eucharist is no exception to that. They don't follow the Catholic belief of transubstantiation of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist, but they do believe in a very real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and this book tracks the historical development of that. Cranmer, of course, was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was in that office as the transition from the Catholic Church, affiliation with Rome and the Catholic Church, to the new Church of England happened. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the spiritual head of the Anglican Church. Some general surveys of English history as well, which have some essays regarding the English Reformation. First, the Oxford Guide to the Book of Common Prayer. The Book of Common Prayer being the principal method of prayer in worship services in the Anglican tradition around the world. And so there are historical surveys in this book about that development early on in the Reformation and thereafter. And Archbishop Cranmer was certainly part of that development. Also, we have the Study of Anglicanism, which involves historical surveys, as well as some essays on that. This is published by Fortress Press. I believe it came out about 20 years ago. I've read parts of this before. Hope to get to it again. Along with some general surveys of English church history, which I mentioned in my bookshelf tour on Anglo-Saxon Christianity. You have the history of the church in England by an Anglican bishop named J.R.H. Moorman, as well as Gordon Mursell's English Spirituality from Earliest Times to 1700. Certainly, these volumes also deal extensively with the English Reformation. So I hope to get to some of these books, as well as a few others during this third quarter regarding the time frame from 1500 to 1820 or so, and I'll check in with you later regarding my Historathon progress. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Peace be with you.